Hi everybody, this is Craig Tanner for The Mindful Eye and the Daily Critique. Today's image was submitted by John, who's an intermediate photographer. John shot this on the Hudson River. He said it was a snapshot of this moment of the geese taking off. He shot this with a Sony a700 16 to 80 zoom. Exposure information is ISO 640 and f-stop 9.5 and a shutter speed of 1/1000th of a second. Says he knows the sun is blown out. He wonders if that's a problem, and what do I think of the color cast. So let's get right into it. Fantastic moment. If John was wanting to stop motion, he's done a beautiful job of that. I think it's a great compromise exposure. What do I mean by that? John's shooting right into the sun coming up, and it's pretty high. He's let the sun blow out a little bit here, but still holding really beautiful detail in the rest of the backlit sky, beautiful detail in the water. And in this exposure, the trees on the far bank of the river and the geese are just silhouette, which I think works out really well. So, just amazing to be able to capture this at all, and a good compromise exposure in this situation. And the layout of the image works pretty well for me. The sun has a lot of weight here. I think it works out real well that the implied energy of the geese is going over the top of this very, very visually heavy part of the image. I think if the sun was, implied to be higher up here, that it might be a little bit more difficult for the image to sort of play out or work. The other thing that I'm enjoying about the image, and John mentioned this in his backstory, is if the geese are going to be sort of in this configuration, pretty lateral lines here, then the sky, the clouds, are creating a unity with that. You have these long sort of shapes of clouds, and the patterns of the clouds to a large extent are mimicking the movement of the birds. And I think that works well. I think it also works well with the texture on the water. Really difficult in a lot of ways to talk about perfect world changes to a shot like this, where it's so much connected to a moment. And wildlife, no matter how you photograph it, to me is just such a difficult subject matter. But we do talk about perfect world variations or changes, and just to remind everybody, perfect world just simply means that in theory we can make the changes. It just gives us a chance without the resistance of impossibility or thinking about that in our mind. It just gives us a chance to suggest changes without resistance, because we just pretend that we could slow time down or lean out over the cliff or fly or have the lens that we don't have, so on and so forth. In a perfect world, I think if I was concerned with the sun here, let's say that I got here and the geese are on the water, and I was thinking, that they are going to take off at some point, and I'd like to get that shot, and I'm going to be shooting, in this case, from west to east. So I'm going to be shooting right into the light. One thing that I could think about doing, if I didn't want this kind of contrast, is instead of the ISO 640 here and an f-stop of 9.5, I could think about turning my ISO all the way down, going to my smallest aperture, and seeing in some test exposures if I could get to a shutter speed of somewhere around 1/30th or maybe even a 15th. I might even do some test shots here, depending on what stopping all the way down and going to a small aperture would do for me in terms of getting me to a shutter speed relative to this exposure on the background. I'd really want to sort of test in this neighborhood of 1/15th, 1/30th, maybe a 60th. If the changes here didn't get me that low, and I think it just about would, I could put on a polarizer and slow the shutter down by 2 more stops. But what I'm getting at here is working with a slower shutter speed in this focal length of 80 millimeters. I think this is a crop factor camera. Sorry if I'm wrong about that. And then panning with the birds as they take off and trying to match the motion of the birds with the panning lens so that they would be implied to be fairly sharp, and it would blur all of this background. It would blur the clouds and everything. And as it blurred, what would happen is the ideas here would smudge across the bright area of the sun, and it would help to cut down on that contrast. The other thing, obviously, that it would do, if we pan along with a moving subject, is it can do one of the most powerful things in a still photograph. It could imply motion by having one thing or some things that look like they're implied to be stop motion, and then the background or other things moving against that. And that could be visually very powerful. And the other thing too about the implication of motion in still photographs is, in addition to a lot of times simplifying design, it can have a big psychological effect on the viewer at the level of just psychological time. And in a super rough way, in a very rough way, I have created a layer to just sort of show you what that might have looked like if we could have panned along. And I don't think that the motion blur panning would have been quite this dramatic, but maybe something potentially close to this, and it might have helped to simplify the image. John mentions the color cast, and this does have a real strong sense of just kind of orange yellow everywhere, and I personally would be pushing to get some more color depth into it to try and move the viewer inside of the image a little bit more. One color idea can be very one note from an emotional or psychological standpoint. So here's a layer where I just brought some blue in, and then in a perfect world, I really wish, even though I'm enjoying sort of the repetition of all these lateral lines, I really wish that in some respects the birds were breaking that up, so that the background could kind of be this repetition of lateral movement of line and sort of shelves of ideas, and then the birds could be a juxtaposition, maybe a wing shape or something that cuts across this, or maybe even the classic formation of the chevron of the geese. It sort of goes back to that simple idea of something that is more rectangular or square or hard edge from a geometry standpoint being juxtaposed with ideas that are more circular or more meandering. And obviously that's a super perfect world suggestion, because this is the configuration of geese that John had to deal with. But just some thoughts about color, and also the technical idea of maybe setting yourself up to do some kind of a pan and play with motion blur. The truth is, it's a stunning moment and amazing considering how difficult this kind of shot is, that John, just as a snapshot, was able to pull this off. Really beautiful shot, great compromise exposure here, great moment. I want to say a big thank you to John for sharing this image with us on the Mindful Eyes Daily Critique. Hope to see you again real soon, everybody.